Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly not an easy task to follow the wonderful presentation that was certainly visually impactful and mentally stimulating by my colleague. And it's even more difficult as I know that I'm the only thing standing between you and your lunch. However, what I would like to talk about today is hope and hopelessness. The concept of revolution has always been a romantic concept. To many, and especially to the youth, the idea of revolution is always an idea of change, of dramatic change, of real change, and of accomplishing what our dreams are. The problem is that in many cases, and most cases, revolution does not result in accomplishing our dreams. When we think of revolution, we go back to the French Revolution, to the American Revolution, to the classic romantic idea of what revolution means. It's to throw away the oppressors, to remove the aggressors, and to create a society of justice. However, we also need to remember that soon after the French Revolution, France became an oppressive state. We also have to remember that soon after the American Revolution, thousands and hundreds of thousands of Native Americans were killed, so prosperity of this new state can be preserved. Then we moved into a new type of revolution, the radical left, the Marxist ideology, and the Soviet Union, China, all these new left revolutions came to the world and provided a different idea for the labor, for the workers of the world to unite against the capitalist oppressors. But again, these revolutions didn't succeed in bringing in prosperity to the masses. The workers did not unite, and new oppressors were brought into the picture. And now, in this age, we have what we might call the e-revolution, where we see that revolution starts on Twitter, on Facebook, in social media, on the internet, and then moves to the streets and does exactly what revolution is supposed to do: collect the masses and drive them towards the palace. And this has happened in many cases, but especially in the Arab Spring. We saw it in the Occupy movement. We saw it with the yellow vests, that we have a new trend in revolution where it's not centralized. It's not based on a main idea. It's based on dreams and the prospect of change. But again, as soon as the Arab Spring at least ended, we saw that it failed again to provide us with what we need as masses, to provide us with the change that we were hoping for. Samuel Huntington talked about the three waves of democracy, or democratization. Huntington was very keen to say that we're moving towards the liberal determinism of our age, that the whole world is moving positively towards democracy, towards a just society, and where capitalism would provide a chance for all. Of course, now we know that Huntington's and Fukuyama's ideas did not result in reality. What we had instead is corruption of capitalism, if you will. And as our capitalist speaker, said in the panel, the problem is that even the idea of capitalism has been corrupted. The idea behind liberalism has been corrupted. And what we're seeing today is a result of that. What happens when democratization and revolution slows down? In every wave this happened. It gives way for a new age of tyranny, oppression, and corruption. And who are the tyrants? Who are the oppressors? Who are the corrupt officials? They're the youth of yesterday. You have to remember that Any tyrant who's now there on his seat, decades ago, was probably a revolutionary youth, somebody who believed in the ideals and probably worked towards them. Today in the Arab world, if you talk about our tyrants, most of them had Western education. Most of them resemble the youth of today in the type of education they got, the type of activism they worked through when they were young. But history kills the dreamer in the youth and produces the tyrant and the oppressor and the corrupt. What happens to youth when dreams are shattered? Youth have three ways to go to. Either violent extremism, because basically the easiest answer is to say that words have no meaning, peaceful action only results in the killing of the innocent, and the only way to deal with this is through violence. And we have seen the rise of these groups all around the world, not only in the Muslim world. Everywhere we've seen radical, violent extremist groups taking shape and becoming a reality. If not, then they will turn to populism, to the message of hate, to exclusionism, to wanting people like Trump to be in office, to enact policies that exclude others. We've seen this happening not only in the United States, we've seen it happening in Europe, we've seen it happening in the greatest democracies around the world. Why? Because there's a loss of hope in the ideal. If not so, then youth turn to apathy. And apathy is the disease of democracy. You can't have a viable democracy. You can't have real change with an apathetic populace. Unless you have a population that's willing to be actively engaged in politics, actively engaged in changing the status quo, there will be no change, and democracy will not function. Democracy will die at the hand of apathy. So violence, populism, and apathy, are these the only choices? Well, first of all, let us answer another question. What is the future now? What will the future hold for us? Many of the speakers today talked about either the gloom and doom of our future or the prospect of change in a romantic sense. Sadly, if you talk to any political scientist or international relations expert, the only answer you'll get, and this is the one that I'm afraid I don't have any other, is that we are in an age of instability. And when I say instability, I don't mean for a certain region. I mean for the world as a whole. There is talk now about a new economic crisis that will eclipse the crisis of 2008. We have seen a rise of oppressive values and a decline of liberal and democratic values. Why is this happening? I can give you two reasons for this. One is the idea that we're moving from a unipolar to a multipolar world. Go back in history and look at every time there's been a seismic change in the world order. This doesn't happen without a period of chaos, without a period of war, without instability. And this is what is happening today. What we're seeing in the world today is instability all around the world, because the whole world, leadership and populations, can't understand how to deal with the new reality of the world. The safety of the unipolar system gave us a chance to be apathetic about what's happening in the world. We always say we can't do anything because the global powers want it to be this way or the other. What happens when the global power decides or becomes unable to enact on its hegemony? Then everybody else wants a piece of the cake. All these governments, all these groups, everybody will want to be the new hegemon, will want to have more leverage, more power, and will want to be the rebels that will take down Rome. The other reason is that we have been sold the lie of the deterministic nature of liberalism. Yes, liberalism embodies a lot of the ideals that humanity shares altogether, but in practice, the liberal school, the liberal model, could not accomplish what it set out to do. Instead, it's a return to colonialism. The liberal states, the liberal world order, now is basically just a new shape for hegemony to take over the world. So, is there any hope then? It might seem that hopelessness is logical in the current sense. But if you really feel a loss of hope because of the failure of change, then you have to go back to the French Revolution again. I'm quite sure that those who are part of the revolution itself and who believed in it, and who, like us, when we were living through things like the Arab Spring, were full of dreams and hopes and a very positive outlook for the future. I'm sure that those who participated in the French Revolution, a couple of years later, felt the reality of what happens after revolution, and also lost hope. But the French Revolution set out a trend in politics that is still existent till this day. The French Revolution ignited the American Revolution. It ignited most of the democratization around the world. And now, France is a democracy. I'm sure if you talk to those who participated in the revolution 10 years after the revolution, the first French Revolution, if you ask them, how do you think of the future of France? They probably would have said that it's either a failed state or a return to oppression. And it did for a while. But the idea of change, the idea of peace, the idea of prosperity lived on until it changed the world around it. The other thing is that we have things that we can do, and we should not lose perspective. The binary relationship between oppressive regimes and their people needs to change. And the zero-sum game of we either have a complete democracy, we either have a change of system, or we will not do anything at all. That idea, that mindset needs to change. And this is where I propose the idea of micro-revolution. Revolutionary acts usually, when revolution happens, it creates some sense of chaos. It destabilizes the system. But the concept behind revolution and the mindset behind revolution is a push for change. This is why we use the word revolution in technology, for example, when we say that this technological advancement is revolutionary. And therefore, what I'm suggesting is that in our context, we need to have micro-revolutions on a personal level, on a societal level, in our local contexts, in a way that can actually enact change. We will be change, and we will force the powers that be to accept that change. We will blockade the powers that be in their palace again, just like any other revolution, but not through driving the masses to the door of the palace, to the gates of the palace, but through starting with change at the micro level. Think with me how we can change our schools to make it more participatory, change our companies to make it more socially responsible, change our societies to consult with one another on our social issues. Forget about the idea of changing only politics. Let's change everything, and let's become democratic in a way. Let us all become democratic in a way that will make those who do not believe in change, do not believe in revolution, do not believe in democracy, ashamed of who they are, and what they represent, because we are change. We are the real reason for what happens in the world today, and it's not them. I would like to close with an anecdote that, to me, was at least it changed my mindset at the time. I was sitting in a cafe in London, just off the National Library, and two elderly gentlemen were sitting right beside me, and there was a very heated discussion. The discussion was around the failure of polling models to predict Brexit and Trump. And of course, this is a very statistical issue, and being, somebody who works with public opinion data, I was kind of interested in the discussion. But what interested me more was a sentence one of the gentlemen said. He said to the other, "Do you know why our models can't predict what's happening in the world today?" So the other gentleman said, "No." And this gentleman said, "Because the world we used to live in is no more." Thank you very much.